Hello, viewers and subscribers. Welcome to Blackford's Art of Learning. In today's sixth grade lesson, we will be focusing on RI 6.9, comparing and contrasting one author's presentation of events with that of another. So let me go ahead and share my screen. So welcome to middle school. And we're going to follow our learning pathway today. And today's quote is, "The beautiful thing about learning is that nobody can take it away from you," by B.B. King. Please remember that your debate is due on Friday, January 26, 2024. And here are your debate steps again. Now let us look at our standard for today. RI 6.9, compare and contrast one author's presentation of events with that of another. The word compare means to judge, suggest, or consider that something is similar or of equality to something else. And contrast means the state of being different from something else. The word events mean a thing that happens, especially one of importance. So in this standard, all we're doing is to find the similarities and differences between different authors' work and how they present the events that happen in the story. So we're going to be comparing and contrasting two stories, and we're going to look closely at how the authors present the events in the story. Let us view this anchor chart on comparing and contrasting texts. So number one, we're going to number the passages so that we know the number of paragraphs in the passage. We're going to determine the topic of each story. So we want to find out what's the main idea that the author is trying to bring across to the reader. We're also looking at, we're going to think about the author's purpose. Why is the author writing this story? Is it to inform us? Okay, so there are various purposes: to inform, entertain, persuade. All right. 4, look for ideas that are the same. So while we are comparing the two stories, we're going to look for anything that is similar in both stories. 5, look for ideas that are different. We're going to contrast those stories. Number 6, make a chart to sort your thoughts. So here are some words that we will use when we're comparing: same, also, both, alike, in common, similarly, and in the same way. And here are some words that we can look out for or use when we are talking about contrast. So different, although, on the other hand, however, but, even though, differ, and unlike. Now we're going to view an instructional video to learn about comparing and contrasting based on author's perspective and genre. That's a part of RI 6.9.
Today we're working on the standard of comparing and contrasting one author's presentation of events with that of another. So for today we have 2 paragraphs. Both of these paragraphs are written by different authors, but they're about the same event, when we had the first person step on the surface of the moon. We're going to start by reading the 2 articles. I'll never forget the day that Apollo 11 landed on the moon. It was July 20th, 1969, and I had just turned 12. Although it took place late on a Sunday night, our time, my parents let me stay up past my bedtime to join the millions of people watching Neil Armstrong take the first step on the moon's surface. I still recall how my imagination raced. Would I be able to live on the moon one day? At that moment, anything seemed possible. Now, before I read the second paragraph, I want to think about what is the genre of this article. I notice that they talk about I, or I'll, and I, and me, and my, and a lot of personal feelings. So in this case, I know that this one is an autobiography. Because it's a personal story about his own life. That's important because it lets me analyze his personal perspective on it. Now I'm going to go ahead and read this article and think about how this author feels or how this author wrote this story. At 10:56 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Sunday, July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong became the first person to set foot on the surface of the moon. Astronaut Buzz Aldrin followed Armstrong onto the lunar surface 20 minutes later. These historic events were broadcast from the moon's surface and watched by perhaps the largest television audience ever, approximately 500 million people around the world. Now, this article is written from a slightly different perspective. There's no I, and so I know it's not written from an autobiographical perspective. This one just seems to be presenting information, so in this case, this is written from an informational article perspective. Now what I want to do is I want to look to see what information is the same from the two articles. I notice both of them contain the date, July 20th, 1969. They both tell me that Neil Armstrong was the person who stepped onto the surface of the moon first. In this one it tells me that the specific time was 10:56. In this one it talks about how it was late Sunday night, but it doesn't give me a specific time. It talks about how it was Apollo 11 here. I don't believe that on this one it talks about the specific mission's name. That might be about all the specifics that are the same on the two. This one says it was Sunday night, and this one does say that it was Sunday. This one, when we start to look at the differences, for this one, since it is an autobiography, we're given a specific insight into the character's feelings. It talks about how his imagination was racing. It talks about how it was late. Not a specific time, but that it was late, and that kind of sets the mood. It talks about bedtime. It talks about what he was wondering. Would we be able to live on the moon one day? It talks about what he was recalling or what he was thinking. It talks about what age he was. It talks about it was a day that they would never forget. So this one is a lot more personal. It kind of sets the mood or the tone. This one ends up being a lot more factual. It introduces us to astronaut Buzz Aldrin, whereas in the first article we don't even know that there was a second person who followed up. It talks about how there was more events that followed 20 minutes later. It talks about how there was additional people who were watching this, that 500 million people around the world were watching this, and that how it was being broadcast, and that there was all the world basically following this. So our learning target was that we are comparing and contrasting one author's presentation of events with another. We have two separate genres here, and each of these genres have some things that are in common, and so both could be used to gather facts about the first person who landed on the moon. But they also present the facts in a slightly different way based on their perspective. If you wanted more of a first-hand approach or a personal perspective, we would end up going with this autobiography. If you want more of just the specific facts of the time, the date, the who, the when, the where, the what, you would end up with going with this informational text. If you really want more of that broad picture, though, you probably want to look at both of these sources. If you take both of these sources into consideration, you would get the who, what, when, where, and what, as well as that personal connection and kind of the mood and the tone of it. So today we looked at comparing and contrasting, and we could see how informational can give us some of the facts, but autobiographical can give us more of the emotion and the tone.
Okay, boys and girls, I hope you have listened to the video and you learned how to compare two texts. So we noticed one of the texts was an autobiography, which gives information about a person's life. And then the other one was an informational text, which gives us facts and information about particular events. Okay? We're going to be looking at those two stories again, and we will be highlighting the similarities and differences in those two stories. All right, now it's time for us to do a Padlets. And this is where
For our video today, are you ready for?
You are going to record all the different types of genres that you're familiar with. We have been learning about genres, so I want you to share with me. You're going to record the types of genres that you have learned about or you already know. So once you click on the link, you can click on the plus sign and begin typing the genres that you know. And while you are typing your response, you can go ahead and think about what these types of genres mean. So we know that historical fiction is made up stories which has events that occurred in the past or in history, while mystery is a story which contains a problem that must be solved, right? And a biography is a story about somebody else's life, which is written by someone else. An autobiography is a story of somebody's life written by that same person. And nonfiction gives us factual information. Fairy tales are stories that begin with once upon a time. They usually end with happily ever after, and they have various characters, fairy tale characters. We have folk tales that are stories that were handed down from generation to generation, and people usually learn a lesson from these folk tales. Okay. All right, let's go back to learning more about our standard, and we're going to use the picker wheel to select someone to read for us today. Okay, so Pam will be reading for us today. So before we get into our reading, I want you to pause the video and you're going to record the meaning of these words that we're going to come across in our readings today. So go ahead, boys and girls, and pause the video. Okay, boys and girls, now that you have recorded the definition for each term, let us go ahead and review, and you can match your definition to mine. So lunar is related to the moon. Aviator is a pilot. Encounter, to unexpectedly experience or be faced with something difficult or hostile. Altitude, the height of an object in relation to sea level or ground. Famous, known about by many people. Championed, to support the cause of or defend. Equality, the state of being equal, especially in status rights, and opportunities. All right, so let us move on. And remember, we had selected somebody to read today. So Pam was the person who was selected. So Pam will begin reading. We're looking at page 179 to 181 in our iReady book, or you can simply work from Classgeek. All right, so lesson 18, comparing and contrasting. If you have ever read 2 articles about a movie star, you often come away with 2 different impressions. Even if 2 pieces of writing are about the same topic, they don't always present the same idea. Each author might have a different purpose for writing, a different point of view about the topic, or access to different information. For example, an author writing a biography or a true account of a person's life will have a different perspective than the person writing his or her own autobiography that tells about the same events from personal experience. So here we have 2 different types of genre. One is a biography, which is a true account of a person's life, which is written by someone else. And an autobiography, as the prefix auto means, has to do with self. So autobiography is a piece of writing written by the person, him or herself. Okay, so it says read the following text. The first describes the 1969 moon landing from the viewpoint of a woman who saw the event. The second is from a student's history report. So I'll never forget the day that Apollo landed on the moon. It was July 20, 1969, and I had just turned 12. Although it took place late on a Sunday night, our time, my parents let me stay up past my bedtime to join the millions of people watching Neil Armstrong take the first step on the moon's surface. I still recall how my imagination raced. Would I be able to live on the moon one day? At that moment, anything seemed possible. All right, so let us look at this one. You notice it's saying I'll. It says my. So this looks like an account that was written by a person who actually encountered these events. So this is an autobiography. Okay. And let's look at the second text. At 10:56 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Sunday, July 20, 1969, Neil Armstrong became the first person to set foot on the surface of the moon. Astronaut Buzz Aldrin followed Armstrong onto the lunar surface 20 minutes later. These historic events were broadcast from the moon's surface and watched by perhaps the largest television audience ever, approximately 500,000,000 people around the world. So this one is giving a lot of information about Neil Armstrong's trip to the moon and the second person who landed minutes later, and the events that which were broadcasted on television. So this looks like informational text or non-fiction. So it can be informational or non-fiction. So let's type our response. Informational, or it can be non-fiction. Okay, so now we are going to, it says now read both accounts a second time. So I'm going to ask you to pause the video and read both of the accounts a second time. Once we have done that, we're going to circle the information that is similar in both texts, then underline details in each text that do not appear in the other. So let's start with the similarities. So let's circle all the similarities now. Okay, so as we can see in both texts, it mentioned July 29, 1969. It also mentioned Neil Armstrong, who landed on the moon. Okay. It made mention of Sunday. It happened on a Sunday night. This one also mentioned Sunday. All right, do you see any other similarity? So this one mentioned that millions of people were watching Neil Armstrong take the first step on the moon. And this one says approximately 500 million people around the world were watching the televised version, right? Is there anything else that stands out that is similar between the two texts? So here it says, Neil Armstrong, he took the first step on the moon's surface right here. And then in the next one, it said he became the first person to set foot on the surface of the moon. So that's also similar. Now we can look at the differences. Let's go ahead and change the color and we can look at the differences. So in this autobiography, the person had just turned 12. It didn't mention anything about this in the other story. My imagination race was not mentioned in the other story. My parents let me stay up past bedtime was not mentioned either. All right, so let's look at the next story. So this part about Buzz Aldrin was not mentioned in the story above. We didn't hear of another person joining Neil Armstrong on the moon. Largest television audience ever was also not mentioned. Okay. Okay. Yes, so good job identifying the similarities and differences. It says when reading different texts on the same topic, you can compare and contrast the author's purpose and points of view. This can help you understand why each author chose to include certain details and leave out others. So because this one is an autobiography, the author was just focused on relating information that happened to her while she was 12 and she was watching Neil Armstrong taking the first step on the moon. Then this one, the author's purpose was to give information about the events that happened when Neil Armstrong went on the journey to the moon. All right, so let's continue with our lesson, and we're going to read the following short biography of Amelia Earhart. It's called Born to Fly by Anna Randolph. So Amelia Earhart, she was an aviator or pilot. She was also a pioneer and a writer, and she was the first female aviator to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. So we're going to hear her biography. And remember, a biography is written about someone's life. It is written by another person giving an account of someone else's life. So Born to Fly. Amelia Earhart didn't always dream of becoming an aviator. While she had seen airplanes growing up, it wasn't until her early 20s that she realized she was born to fly. When Earhart was 20 years old, she and a friend attended a stunt flying contest. Their fun ended, however, when one of the planes came zooming towards them. In spite of the danger, Earhart stood firm, displaying the same fearlessness that she would continue to show all her life. This encounter proved to be a sign of things to come. Just a few years later, Earhart found herself flying inside an airplane. On December 28, 1920, pilot Frank Hawks changed Earhart's life by taking her on her first plane ride. It was then that she knew she was meant to be in the air. Earhart attended the first flying lesson just 5 days later, and by 1922, she was already setting records. She became the first woman to fly to an altitude of 14,000 feet. Over the next 15 years, Earhart would continue to make her mark on the record books time and time again, proving that flying was truly in her blood. So it says, explore how to answer this question. How does the author's purpose influence the focus on the text and the details presented? All right, so you can pause the video and you're going to record what you think the author's purpose is for this text and how it influenced the details that were presented. All right, so the author wants to focus on the early part of Earhart's life to explain her passion for flying. Which facts has the author presented to show how Earhart's experiences started her on the path to becoming a famous and fearless aviator? All right. Okay, so this is a biography. So the author's purpose is to inform. She wants the reader to learn more about Amelia Earhart. The author wants to explain how and why Earhart learned to love flying. So let us go and record our response. Okay, I hope you have recorded your response. And with a partner, you can discuss the author's point of view about Amelia Earhart and how these feelings are shown throughout the text. How might the author's point of view toward Earhart have affected her choice of details and her presentation of events? All right, so you can pause the video and discuss those questions. And now let us read another biography of Amelia Earhart. And we're going to use the close reading and the hint to complete the activity. So the close reading asks us to underline important facts about Amelia Earhart that the author includes in the biography. What do they help you understand about Earhart, and why might the author have chosen to include them? So we will read and then we can respond to those questions. So Earhart on Equality by Brian Vargas. And remember, the word equality means the state of being equal, especially in status, rights, and opportunities. It says, as a famous female aviator, Amelia Earhart did much to advance equality for women. In 1928, she became the first woman to fly across the Atlantic, and she spent the rest of her life fearlessly flying farther, faster. Earhart was first to fly many long, dangerous routes, and she encouraged other women to fly. She championed women in the science as a guest professor at Purdue University. She said, women must try to do things as men have tried. When they fail, their failure must be but a challenge to others. All right, so let us go ahead and underline important facts about Earhart. All right, so she was the first woman to fly across the Atlantic. She encouraged other women to fly, and she championed women in the sciences, right? Okay. So let's fill in the chart below based on the two biographies you read. Write facts that are different under the title of each biography, and write facts that are similar in the two biographies under both. So what we can do is go back to the text, go back to each text, and you can record what was similar and what was different. All right, so we can see here that in this one, Born to Fly, where she took her first airplane ride on December 28, 1920. Let's see if that one was mentioned here. Right, it's that one was for, right, so this one didn't mention about the first airplane ride. It just said she was the first woman to fly. All right. So let's see if there's any other contrast to the story or something that was mentioned in this story that wasn't mentioned in the previous one. She also took flying lessons. Let's see, she attended her first flying lessons 5 days later. That was not mentioned in this story. Okay. She also became the first woman to fly to an altitude of 14,000 feet. So that was not mentioned in the previous story as well. So let us look at this to see if there's anything that is only mentioned in this story right here. This one mentioned, we already highlighted it. She was the first woman to fly across the Atlantic. She encouraged other women to fly, and she championed women in the sciences. So those were not mentioned in the previous story. So let's look at similarities now. Let's look at some similarities. We know that in both stories it mentioned that she was an aviator. She was a female aviator. She's an aviator. Also said, let's see, she showed fearlessness. I think this was mentioned in the previous one as well. Let's see. Yes, when she spoke about, yes, right here it says rest of her life, spent the rest of her life fearlessly flying. I know it made mention of that. And she also, I think she also set records. Let's see. So this record she set a record that she was the first woman to fly across the Atlantic. So that's one record. And I know they mentioned a record over here. She was the first woman to fly to an altitude of 400. So that has to do with record. Both of them speak of record. But even though each of them has mentioned a different record that was set by her. So let us go ahead and complete our charts with the information. You can pause the video and record your responses. All right, I hope you have recorded your responses. Thank you for all your hard work, boys and girls. And now it's time for our small group. So in your small groups, you're going to complete this activity where you're going to compare these two stories. Smoke jumper in space brings back moon trees. And you're going to compare that story to the moon tree. And then you can answer these questions that follow. Remember, while you're in your small group, you should not interrupt me while I'm with a group. You should work quietly at your table, all right? And I will be working with a group of students. Once you're finished with the previous activity, you're going to complete News ELA, Earth's Systems, What is a Biome? And you'll receive a printout of the story, or you can work on this story from News ELA online. You will also do Common Lit, where you'll read the story online and answer the questions. Okay? Then you'll do Nearpod. Click on the link and work on the Nearpod activity. We will also work on our chapter book. We're doing chapter 8. You can click on the link to watch the video of the story, or you can read the book itself, the hard copy
Chapter
of the
8,
book.
Gunshots.
All right. And then you'll complete the specified page in your student workbook. I'll give you that page in class. And any new vocabulary that you have come upon during our lesson today, please remember to record them in your My Book of Words. Okay? All right, so remember you can utilize the Rally Coach Cooperative Learning Strategy during your small group time. Remember to complete your reflection and feedback. So thank you everyone for joining my lesson today. Please remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and turn on the post notification bell. Once again, boys and girls, please remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and turn on the post notification bell. Enjoy the rest of your day and look out for other videos.